Let's install the Nvidia proprietary driver on Arch Linux. So this will give us better performance and stop KDE Plasma from crashing when I launch it with Wayland. I'm logged into GNOME right now, so no crashes. So this is for a slightly older but not too old card. A little more on that later. Now we're going to install it first, and then we'll talk a little bit more about alternate packages and give you slightly better explanation with some background info after we install it. So first thing, let's just jump right into it. First thing, let's run lspci and grep for our card. Just to verify, first we should do this Nvidia GeForce. So you do something like this just to verify which card you have. So GTX 1080, that's what I meant. It's a little bit older, and it makes a difference which driver you install. We'll talk about the different versions of the package at the end of this video, but let's first check what driver we have in use just to verify that. lsmod grep-i nou, and there we have the Nouveau driver. So we don't want that. We want the Nvidia proprietary driver. So more on that, the difference between those, but this is the open source community driver. It doesn't perform as well. So if you search for NVI, you see there's nothing there. So no proprietary driver, right? So let's clear this. And the first thing we want to do before we install anything, we want to update the system. So sudo pacman-sy, and if you don't need the latest stuff, you don't absolutely have to update the system first, but you really should. So anyways, let's update the system. I may or may not have updates to actually install. I'm going to synchronize the database first, and looks like there are actual packages that have been updated today, because I've actually my last update was today. And between this morning and this evening, looks like there are some updates to install. So now our system is up to date. Let's install. First, I'm going to install the kernel headers. If you select the DKMS package, you need the kernel headers. Otherwise, you don't need these. More on that later. So sudo pacman-s linux headers, and that should be all you need. But if you have an LTS kernel, and if you don't know what that is, then you probably don't have it. But if you have an LTS kernel, you might want the headers for that. You may as well install both headers now, so you have them for later, just in case. But you don't have to if you want to have less stuff installed on your system. So Linux headers and Linux LTS headers. And if you have some other kernel, I guess install the headers for that kernel as well. So get your kernel headers installed. And next we're going to install some dependencies. Actually, one of these is a dependency. The other one, so one of these is just nice to have, and one of these is an actual dependency. I just like to explicitly install both of these. So NVIDIA utils and NVIDIA settings. Two good things to have if you have an NVIDIA card. So let's go ahead and install those packages. All right, so NVIDIA utils, NVIDIA settings installed. Now let's finally go ahead and install the package with the actual drivers. So sudo pacman-S Nvidia, and if I were to just run Nvidia, this would work for my current kernel and install the driver. And if I wanted to just install the Nvidia package, I could have skipped all those dependencies and literally every command I've typed so far, I technically didn't need to run. Some of them were just checks. I didn't need to do the system upgrade, and I technically wouldn't need the kernel headers if I installed this package, and the Nvidia utils and settings, only the one that's needed would be included as a dependency in here. So technically, all you have to do is say sudo pacman-S Nvidia, and that would install the proprietary drivers. So just to point out before I continue, I'm not going to install this package, but you could just, if you want the simple answer, you could just install this one package right here, and that would solve everything for you, assuming you have the standard default kernel that you get with Arch Linux. Now, if what I prefer to do is do a dash DKMS. I prefer to have those other packages installed. And if you're adding the dash DKMS version of the package, you need the kernel headers installed. That's why we installed those before, because I prefer this version. So this version, the DKMS version of the Nvidia driver, will get rebuilt every time you upgrade your kernel. It automatically just rebuilds it. So if you switch your kernel to some other version of the kernel, it automatically just compiles this for whatever kernel you have. So it's more flexible, and it's just it supports all kernels. It rebuilds every time. It's nice, right? Now, technically, you could still upgrade your kernel before, so long as you stick with the same kernel, the standard kernel that matches the standard Nvidia driver. It should upgrade for you anyways. So that's not really an issue, so long as you don't change things around too much on your system. But this is just a more flexible and, I think, better choice, so I'm going with this one. So I'm going to install Nvidia-DKMS, the DKMS version of this. I'm going with that. I'm going to hit yes for the default and get that installed. But yeah, just technically, it could be as easy as running pacman-s Nvidia. I just want to show you the better, what I think is the better way. And there we go. So now that we've installed that, we're going to reboot the system. So let's just bounce the system. Then we're going to bring it up and just verify that it was installed. Before we do that, I do want to check one thing, ls-mod grep-i nou. So nuevo is still there, and nvi not there. So once we bounce it, the nuevo driver is going to be it's going to be removed or just disabled, and the proprietary driver will be there. So sudo reboot, and here we are logged back in. Let's open up a terminal, increase the font size a little bit so you can see it in the video. Whoops. And let's verify that the modules are there. Whoops. ls-mod grep-i nou for Nuvo. So no Nuvo. That one's gone. That's good. So we want to get rid of the open source community driver and NVI. So there we go. There's the NVIDIA proprietary driver installed. So we can see these are the kernel modules for the proprietary driver, and they are loaded. Now, there was also some setting you had to do for the NVIDIA DRM module. In older versions, you had to change some things in a config file. This has actually been updated by default, so you don't have to do that anymore. So you can, if you're thinking of an extra step that you saw somewhere, you don't have to do that step. But you can check the Arch Wiki if you want more details on that. But let's test it with NVIDIA-SMI just to query some info about our card. There you go. This is our card, a bunch of details about it, the driver version, CUDA version. So this is the driver version from NVIDIA, and it usually matches the actual package version. I'm pretty sure these are supposed to match. The package, like the actual Arch package, should match the driver version from NVIDIA as well. There's my NVIDIA GeForce GTX 1080. So an old card, but still performing really well for most of the stuff I'm playing. And let's run this. I want to show you this. Pacman-SI NVIDIA DKMS. Whoops. There we go. So we can get some info about this package. So repository extra, name, NVIDIA DKMS. There's the version again. NVIDIA kernel modules, module sources, architecture, so on and so forth. So just some good information to be able to check. I just kind of wanted to point that out to you as well. So those are all the checks. Let's explain some background and some information you should know about drivers. All right, so Linux NVIDIA drivers. So first thing I want to point out, up here you see Nuvo. That is the open source community driver. it's slow. It doesn't perform as well because they just didn't have all the information about how the driver should work, or all the hardware information. Nvidia does not want to release all the information and specs to the public, so it's really hard for the community to build an open source driver. So that first driver on the list, Nuvo, it's installed by default on a lot of distros, but it does not perform as well. So if you want performance for like video editing or gaming or whatever else you're doing, you're not going to want that. You're going to want the proprietary drivers, or either of the the drivers from Nvidia. So there's 3 drivers here. That first one is the community driver. It's slow. It might work very well for you if you don't need a lot of performance. And in some cases, it crashes, like in my case with archlinux here, trying to run KDE on Wayland, it crashes with the Nuvo driver. GNOME is totally fine, but yeah, in some cases it may be less stable. Some cases it may be more stable, I guess, than the other drivers. And your mileage may vary. I've seen other distros where it worked a little bit. It was pretty stable, and you can kind of count on it to work. Regardless of like which card that you have, and it may be your only option with some of the really, really old cards. Now, this next one, the Nvidia proprietary driver. So it is faster, and it's officially from Nvidia, and it basically, the kernel module and the user space are both proprietary, and this is for 10 series cards and older. It should work for newer cards than the 10 series, but you need it on 10 series and older. You can't use the next one I'm going to mention. I'll tell you why in just a bit, but basically this includes a binary blob that you need for the 10 series and older. So basically my GTX 1080 and older require the Nvidia proprietary driver. And for a while, these first 2 drivers were the only 2 drivers out there. There was the community driver and Nvidia proprietary. Well, what happened was, after the 10 series, a new series of cards came out, and every card after that had some of that functionality built into the card, built into a component on the hardware. And so since that secret trade secret technology is built into the card, they were able to open source the rest of the functionality in the driver. So Nvidia themselves came out with an open source driver, and at first it was not recommended. It was recommended you should stick with the proprietary driver for everything, but eventually it became more and more stable, and now they recommend the Nvidia open source driver for any card that supports it. So it's also fast, also officially from Nvidia, but and the kernel module is open source, but the user space component is still proprietary. Now, cards newer than the 10 series, the hardware component replaces the binary blob functionality, that functionality that used to come in the proprietary driver. It's implemented within hardware now, so that's why they can make it open. But in order to implement that in hardware, you need one of the cards that implements that in hardware. So now with this new driver, they're not implementing it in the open source kernel module part of the driver. So it counts on that being physically implemented in hardware. So if it's not implemented in hardware, like on the older cards, it just won't work. The older cards don't have that component. They need that binary blob. So you need the Nvidia proprietary card. So that's why my GTX 1080 needs the Nvidia proprietary driver, whereas newer cards than that can have the open source driver. But yeah, the Nvidia proprietary driver will work it has the binary blob, but it will work for the older cards and the newer cards. The Nvidia open source driver is optimal for newer cards, but it will only work for the newer cards, not for the older cards, because it requires you, since it's missing the binary blob, it requires that binary blob to be defined inside hardware. So hopefully that makes sense. I kind of phrased that in different ways. So hopefully that's not too confusing. So if you weren't aware that there are multiple drivers, especially the 2 from Nvidia, it can be kind of confusing, and then the package names can also be confusing. So let's take a look at that. Before we get to package names, a couple other terms I wanted to define here. So LTS is the long-term support kernel. So you may be using the regular kernel that updates the standard kernel for Arch. It updates frequently. The long-term support kernel doesn't update as much. So if you chose the long-term support kernel, you're going to need drivers that go together with that long-term support kernel. If you chose the regular default kernel, you need the standard version of the drivers. Now, if you want to use the DKMS drivers, then it doesn't matter. Those should work with any kernel, standard or long-term support. So the DKMS modules, these are modules compiled for the current kernel automatically on every kernel update. The non-DKMS packages include pre-compiled drivers, whereas the DKMS, these packages, DKMS packages, they just include source code and they're built every time. So they're not pre-compiled, right? So that's the difference. So DKMS is more flexible, supports all kernels. It rebuilds every time. That's basically what it is. I think it's a better choice. It's a little bit more complicated, but I think it's more flexible and better. So that's why I went with that. So if we had gone with just the regular standard kernel, if we knew we were going to stick with that, we could just install the regular version of the driver and not deal with DKMS. But it's not a big deal to add it, and I figure I should show you that too, because the alternative is simpler. So if I show you the more complicated method, the easier, simpler method should also be even more easy. So anyways, jump to the next screen here. These are the packages available to install, so you have to choose from these. So remember when I typed I told you could just run pacman-s Nvidia to install the Nvidia driver, this first one on the list. That's the proprietary driver for a normal standard kernel. You could just install that and you'll be all set. You won't need to install kernel headers, and installing that other package that I installed was optional. You probably should install it, but you technically don't have to if you want to make things simple. Now, the next one here, NVIDIA DKMS, that's a proprietary driver with DKMS, so any kernel, that's the one we went with. And then there's NVIDIA LTS. This is one of the pre-built, pre-compiled drivers, but it's specifically compiled for, it's NVIDIA proprietary driver compiled for the LTS kernel. So you can choose the regular kernel, the LTS kernel, or the DKMS for any kernel, which is kind of nice. Now the fourth one on the list says NVIDIA Open. This is the open source driver. It will fail if I try to install it with 10 series and older, like my card. But it would be preferred with newer cards. So anything that says open in the name, that's the NVIDIA open source driver. Those are the ones that you want for newer cards. Anything newer than a 10 series, you want those ones. So that's why you need to know the difference between these. So the NVIDIA open one is for standard kernels. And the NVIDIA Open DKMS is just the DKMS version of it for standard kernels. So if I had a newer GPU, I would just install that one, the NVIDIA Open DKMS. And then there is the NVIDIA Open LTS, same deal, open source driver from NVIDIA for LTS kernels. So those are the 6 main packages that you're going to be installing from the regular Arch Linux Pacman repo. You're going to have to choose between these based on which kernel you have, how flexible you want to be, and whether you have the older or newer cards. Now, there are some cards that are really, really old, like much older than the 10 series, that some of them you might need an older version of the let me actually move along to this next slide here, right here. So older NVIDIA cards. Now I don't have the exact list of which ones these map out to, but if you have a much older card that's not supported by one of those, you may need to use the AUR to install these packages. So these packages exist. Just be aware that these exist. And for all of these DKMS packages, they also have standard kernel packages, and they have standard kernel packages, and they also have LTS packages. I'm not sure which kernels they match or how you would keep that in sync, since they're in the AUR and not in the standard repos. So I would your best bet is to probably go with DKMS. So basically, as NVIDIA comes out with newer and newer versions of their drivers, they will remove support for older cards. And as I remember, I showed you the NVIDIA driver versions. So like the one we installed today was 580.95.005. So basically, you would just be aware of what versions they are. And as Nvidia comes out with newer versions of their driver, they drop support for older cards. So Arch Linux only bases their packages off of what's newly available from Nvidia. So if Nvidia drops support for a card, Arch Linux drops support for a card in the standard repo. So you can look in the AUR for older versions of these drivers based on older versions of the Nvidia driver, right? So these older packages are based on older drivers from Nvidia, and you can install one of these. You would have to find which one of these matches your specific ancient card that you may have. And there is a certain point. Oh, and if you want to see the mapping out for these cards, check the Arch Wiki. The Arch Wiki actually has a mapping for which one of these you might need. And for past a certain level, they don't have packages for them, even in the AUR, and you're probably going to have to be stuck with the Nouveau driver, as far as I'm aware. But those are like really, really old cards. So that's it. That should pretty much cover everything I wanted to cover with NVIDIA cards. I know there's some extra steps for cases where you have like a hybrid system with laptops, where you have an NVIDIA card and like an Intel GPU at the same time, and you want to be able to switch between them. Not covering that in this video. Wanted to kind of acknowledge that. Might make a video on that in the future, but for now, not including that in this video. But there you go. That's it. That's everything I wanted to cover for today with regards to Arch Linux NVIDIA drivers and how to install them. So that was some background on the drivers and the practical instructions on how to install them. So that's it for today. Hopefully you enjoyed this video and found it useful. Stay tuned. Hit that subscribe button for more Arch Linux content and more Linux content in general. We're trying lots of different distros, not just Arch. We do Ubuntu, Mint. I've actually gone through a list of I'm going through a list of every distro I possibly can. I've already uploaded a bunch of these, like distro review videos and driver install videos, all kinds of stuff like that. And I have a ton more distros I'm going to be doing. We also do like Windows and Linux stuff. Windows and Mac OS stuff, a lot of Linux stuff. We do like command line stuff. We do coding, hardware, software, servers, databases, electronics, networking, 3D printing, robots, Raspberry Pis, and more. So if you like that kind of stuff, make sure you're subscribed. Also hit the bell icon so you actually get updates when we come out with new videos. And that is about it for today. So if you have your own experience with Arch Linux drivers, leave a comment down below. But that's it. That's it for this video. So as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys on that next video.